Hi, hello. This is like future me. So if you like this tutorial, you should like and subscribe and share the video and comment, because I forgot to say that at the beginning of this video. So go do that. Now that I'm done making my little advertisement, here's the actual video. Bye. Hi, hello. So in today's video, I will be doing a tutorial video. Well, more or less of an explanation video, because I did get a lot of suggestions in my Discord server, so I thought I would go over a few of them. So the first one was how to draw humans better. So I can't give an exact anatomy tutorial when I have more time, but for general, just across all styles, because I did want to make this more for across all styles, is that animals and people all have shapes. If you're going to draw a person, if you're going to draw a character in any way possible, break it down the shapes. So I am drawing Hatsune Miku, the Persona 5 version of her that I designed for myself a few months ago. And so as you can see, I'm breaking her down into shapes. I'm breaking out circles, hexagons, ovals, all that stuff. Breaking down the body into shapes is the best thing you can do for drawing basically anything with a body, or just anything in general, is breaking it down of what it's made out of. For things like hair, if you are drawing in a more stylized style, hair tends to fall in clumps. So as you can see, I don't draw every strand of hair, I just draw the clumps. And hair usually has a point, like a part where the hair starts. This was kind of a poor example because it's pigtails, but the pigtail starts at a certain point and it goes out. Same thing with hair that's down or in any style. It has a starting point that it goes out from and flows out from. For things such as facial features, this is a stylistic choice. Some people go add every facial feature. There's some styles like Adventure Time that only have the eyes and the nose. But like as a general like proportion rule, I think I said this in my side profile tutorial, the eyes and the ears tend to line up. Like the top of like where the eyebrow ridge is where the top of the ear is, and the bottom of the nose is where the bottom of the ear is about. Eyes are equal distance apart. You can draw the eyes in whichever way. The smaller the eyes get, the weirder it'll be closer together looking. So it's maybe more or less a general rule for like if you have like a dot eye style, like an Adventure Time style, try to make it to where it's like a third. They're on each third of the face. But if you have a style more like mine, it would be an eye apart. I don't follow this rule, but generally the nose is as wide as the eyes are apart. I have more of like an anime-y style, so for most of my characters they don't follow that. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And stuff like that. For like the bodies, females and males tend to be proportioned differently, and then for non-binary individuals, it's just a matter of what you decide to give them feature-wise, like if they're plus-sized or like where you want the weight to go. For females, or if people who are assigned female at birth, the weight tends to go to the hips, so there's a lot more weight in the hips. Obviously, there's a chest, usually skinnier arms unless they work out, stuff like that. So for this Miku design, Miku's a girl, so Miku has all the stuff. Obviously, the weightier hips. Miku's not a plus-sized individual, but it still applies here a little bit, because even if you're skinny, you still have like weight that goes places. For arms, they tend to, for males, they're a little bit longer, but for females, it tends to end at the hips. This can change. I've met people with really long arms and really short arms, but generally your arms end at the pelvis, and if it's a male character or like a taller person, either or, because I've seen both taller people and males have longer arms, or longer arms where they go a little bit past that, but not too far past that, and this is a stylistic decision. I hope that helps. If there's any questions about how to draw people, I will make an anatomy tutorial, but these are just some pointers. Now, how to render, which is probably going to be the bulk of this video. So for rendering is not like shading, okay? So right now I'm rendering. There's no like really shadows, except for on the legs. But what I am doing is rendering is basically establishing depth in something. I don't use my normal style for this because my normal style actually doesn't, well, it has some rendering, but I wanted to show the best example of rendering, so I kind of painted this. So what you're trying to do with rendering is showing like the 3D. So for these clothes, I tried to make sure like the areas where the clothes were stretching or would be closer or just more out, I don't know how to explain it, would be lighter and blended out, and the places that would be more darker or in shadow just to make the suit look more round. I also made it shiny with highlights, but that's later when I did the highlights to make the suit look like more like a latexy material, because that's what I imagine the material to be. For the skin, it is the same process, but skin tends to be a lot softer. So other than the part where the mask is, I tried to keep the rendering very soft. Another thing with rendering specifically, skin specifically, use a more for lighter skin tones, use a more saturated orangey color. It helps keep the skin alive. For other skin tones, the more dark and like orangey you get, the better. And then for really dark skin tones, sometimes you only need a little bit of shading or a little bit of rendering with the darker colors, and you use lighter colors because there's going to be more highlights on like darker skin, because you can only go so dark. But if you add more like highlights, that makes sense. Not trying to make them look lighter, but like if you have somebody who's really, really dark and you've shaded them all you can, it's kind of like with black hair. You've added so much depth, you can't get any more by making it go any darker, so you add some highlights. So that's how I go about it. So yeah, for the eyes, I never use white for the eyes because it's just not like a supernatural for rendering. I always use like either like a light blue, depending on the character's color scheme. I either use like a really, really, really light, almost white, like beigey color, or I use a really, really, really light white blue. So I think it's called eggshell, don't ask, or like a really, really light blue for the eye base color, and then I use like a blue gray for shading, or like a more red gray for shading if it's the eggshell color. For the eyes, I just kind of do the thing where I blur them out and I pop some shading on them. Also, I did want to mention for rendering like just anything in general while the hair is going. For rendering anything in general, such as clothes or like metal or like anything, it is about establishing depth. But when you are establishing that depth, use a more saturated, darker color, because if you use a desaturated, darker color, you tend to like, unless you want that to be the mood of your drawing, you tend to end up making it more or less like desaturated, like sucked out of love and life, if that makes any sort of sense. Along with using a more saturated color just kind of helps the shadow, because I don't like some shadows depending on the light, but in this case it's just rendering. So if you're just working with a rendering and like really average lighting, like this Miku drawing I did, go for darker, more saturated color to give that depth. It just helps. I really can't explain it other than it helps. For rendering hair, since now I'm there, or now I'm almost done, I'm done with the hair. What I did, or what I usually do, especially for more like detailed things like this, or more rendery things like this, I won't say more detailed, but more rendery, I don't define every hair strand, but I try to make sure that you can tell that the hair most definitely has strands. I also blend the strands together by using lighter and darker in the same tone as the hair, and like I have a special brush. I might put it up right now, where I just kind of blend it over each other. I call it my brush. It's not that creative. I really like it. I made it myself. It's an IBS paintbrush, and I really like it. That's why I've been using IBS Paint all the time, is because I really like that brush, and I don't know how to transfer it to Clip Studio, so I've just been using it because I really like it. So yeah, you just blend over. For the metallic-y colors, gold tends to have really dark colors in it, but for the rendering, I just used a more saturated orange. Oh, I should mention this. Okay, so for some colors, it's easier to use other colors to shade them. Like yellow, it's easier to use orange to render or shade yellow than use a darker yellow. So, and for like blue, it's easier to use purple For green, it's easier to use blue. There's some others. For purple, sometimes you can use like a darker blue, but usually it's just use a darker purple SOL. For pink, it's easier to use like a purple or a red, depending on the shade of pink. And then for red, usually I use a darker red or maybe a purple, depending on the type of red. That makes it easier, and it also helps bring colors into your shadows and into your rendering. Okay, so for these shading parts, so this is where the actual shading and highlighting came in. I did the rendering first and then the shading and highlighting to show that the rendering and shading are two different animals. They are similar animals. It's like the difference between a yellow Garfield cat, or no, yellow tabby cat, or like an orange tabby, and a brown tabby. They're different, but they're very similar, and people confuse them sometimes. So for the shading, it is adding the lighting and the shadows. So for this one, there wasn't a lot of lighting or shadows, but there was with the purple I just did. And then on top of, and after I did that, I added the background, which is just the Persona 5 logo. So yeah, but the difference between these is that rendering is establishing depth and shading is establishing like the lighting, like where the shadow is, because depth and shadow can be the same thing sometimes, but there are times where it's really not the same thing. So like in this case, when I rendered it, I wasn't thinking about the light. I took keep the light in consideration on how it would show depth, because if the lighting was coming under, the rendering would be a lot different, because like the chin and the neck would be lighter, obviously, but it's not keeping into account like all the shadows. It's just like showing like where the darker parts would be if it like to make it more of a 3D form. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that really great, but I really hope I am. While shading is just the act of adding shadow. So you can shade without rendering. You kind of can render without shading, but you still kind of shade while you're doing the rendering, because of what I just said. But you can do one without the other. Like, cell shading is a good example of this. You're not rendering when you're cell shading usually. Or, yeah, you're not rendering when you're cell shading. But if you're, like, painting and you're rendering, you'll use shading. But you get what I mean. Or if I didn't shade this, I would have rendered it without shading. There's an example. So at the end of this, you'll see a slide of what it looks like with just rendering and shading, and the final piece. For the final piece, I'm really happy about how it generally turned out. So I'm a big old fan of Persona. I just recently got into it again because I never finished it the first time I played it. And I really like it. I'm also a big fan of Miku. So I saw Miku's Persona 5 like Phantom Thief outfit, and it's gross, and so I redesigned it. Thinking about doing the other Vocaloid characters, but probably my own time, because I don't think that's like a very like in demand thing. But for anybody wondering, Miku's persona and like code name, which is Monarch, she's based off of those iridescent blue butterflies, and her persona is when I design it, it's gonna be a butterfly with a bunch of eyeballs on it, because I think like eldritch god looking things are cool, but I don't know which card it should be. If